I also personally just have a problem with movies that undo sacrifices almost immediately after they happen. So, was it fulfilling, for example, for him to get his hammer after he says, take my life instead of theirs? Yes, it was. But does it also undo the sacrifice immediately by giving him the hammer? Yes, it does. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us one of our favorite guests. Is he really? I don't know. I mean, he comes on so often, maybe we want to take a little bit of a break, but it is Andrew to review one of the classics in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's right. We're going back a little bit for you all. Thor. This film was released in 2011. It's the American superhero film based on the Marvel comics. In case you've been living under a rock, don't know anything about cinema recently, that's what that's about. The screenplay is by Ashley Edward Miller, Zach Stentz, and Don Payne, with a story by J. Michael Straczynski and Mark Prozovich. And it was directed by Kenneth Branagh. That's all the accolades we got for this one, because we're going to get into the movie itself. Andrew, when you see this film, what are your thoughts? What is your initial impression of Thor?
Great superhero movie. It's a solid one. It's a superhero movie done right, and Marvel could do well by just looking at their older projects to know how to make movies now, because they were fine then, but,
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely, in my mind, not the pinnacle of achievement in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think you could argue that some of the earlier ones, such as Captain America and Iron Man, are, amazing movies. I don't know that this one, in my mind, stands up to those, but it's definitely one that's enjoyable, watchable for sure. I was very surprised on this view-through how much I saw aspects of the hero's journey very clearly just spelled out in the film. So a little rote at points, or a little by the book type of story, but it's not bad. Still enjoyable. Just kind of echoing what you were saying, this definitely has a feel of a movie that is a classic superhero movie, right? When you think of a classic superhero movie, there's a sense in which this gives you all of the elements of that. So definitely an interesting film, and it introduced us to the character of Thor, played by Chris Hemsworth, which has become well known at this point in the cinema and as an actor in general. So definitely the start of something very big in that regard. So before we get into that, for people who are not familiar, Andrew, do you want to give them the rundown of what Thor is about?
Sure. Thor follows the origins of, Thor. The movie starts out with him at this ceremony, kind of just acknowledging him, I think. I don't know if it's supposed to be his coronation, but it kind of gets cut short. Thor's reaction to this is to disobey his father and go and attack Jotunheim and the Frost Giants. And doing so gets him banished. He loses access to his power. He loses his hammer. He's no longer worthy to wield it. And so this movie is about him growing as a person and learning the lessons that Odin Allfather meant for him to learn, and then regaining the power that he had lost, as well as becoming worthy to wield the hammer again and fight off his brother Loki.
That's the film. What was your review based off of the 9 points that we used to review films on this podcast?
Okay, you go first, because you were supposed to go first last time, but you didn't.
Bro, I went first last time, and then the review got messed up because...
and then we redid it.
Yeah, so we already knew. Anyways, you're a butt. No, my review was a 4.9 out of 5.
Wow.
What'd you get?
7.1.
Dude, you like Chris Hemsworth too much. All right. That's the review. If you want to get into why 2 points is a pretty big spread for us, we'll see what our discrepancies were in this review today. So stay tuned. Let's start off with that opening scene, as we always do. That idea of how did you first get engaged and gripped with what goes on in this film? It starts off. Dr. Jane Foster and her buddies are out chasing a storm, and then is this Twister? No, as a matter of fact, a man falls from the sky and they hit him with their car. And the question is, where did he come from? Then you get the mighty Asgard historical background narrated by Odin. What were your thoughts on that opening scene?
I liked it. I thought it was, as far as superheroes openings go, it was decent. It kept my attention. I consider the opener to be pretty much, or the opening sequence to end when Thor gets banished, pretty much.
Yeah, I
But
mean, yeah, that really pushes it. Definitely closes the first act because it pushes the main character into the action hardcore at that point.
Yeah.
There's
But
no
I mean, if you're
doubt
talking,
where he's aligned at that
yeah.
element in the movie.
I mean, if you're looking for just the very first scene of just like Jane Foster and her car, like it's kind of like I don't know what we're doing here. In terms of like just the audience doesn't know what's going on, but I thought it was good enough to keep my attention at least.
Yeah, there was something that was very unique about how they played. Well, it wasn't unique. I'm sorry. What they did in this opening scene, which was very appropriate for this film specifically, was the idea that they, even though it's a big superhero film, unlike other superhero films that we see post this one, where there's these big action scenes where they're battling it out and all of that stuff, this one starts off, they're on Earth and they are doing scientific research on Earth. And it's grounding you in the human aspect of this film and the characters of the film rather than going so grandiose in a way that the other films tend to do moving forward from this one. I don't always love that. If you saw our review of The Dead Don't Hurt, they actually ruined the film by doing one of those scenes. But in this case, it actually was pretty good at establishing the human aspects and elements of this movie so that we can relate to it better, but then going back to the fantastical realm and bringing us to the fantasy world that we see in the Marvel Universe. So I liked it a lot. I thought it was actually apt and appropriate in many ways, and they got full points on that. So that's all there is to that, because then you see this character Thor, and you have the whole discussion with him and Loki. They go off to Jotunheim, and then they come back, and Odin says that you are basically a loser, and you shouldn't have done that. Now you've caused war, and I have to punish you. Get out of my house. You're banished. And he does big dad moves and throws him in the dumpster. What were your thoughts on the character of introducing Thor as this arrogant character and then also his banishment into the realm of Earth?
I thought it was great. I think in terms of like, you have to ask yourself, this is a superhero movie. But one thing that makes superhero movies appealing is that they still suffer the same character flaws that us as normal people do. And so it's their way of, it's the way you make the superhero relatable to the individual. It's just a person with powers, pretty much. And this is very much Thor. Like, he's been raised the son of the Allfather. This guy has united the nine realms. You couldn't get any more powerful than this, pretty much. At least in Thor's concept of the universe. Sure, we haven't been introduced to certain characters like Galactus or whatever, but and as far as the MCU is concerned at this point, Odin Allfather is like, he's up there. And so Thor wants for nothing. He has a great life. He is this beloved champion of the people. He has this awesome hammer. He's going to be king one day. And as far as he's concerned, he's basically king. And you get that even from his conversations with his dad.
Mm-hmm.
And Odin kind of, this is a wake-up call for him. And he like even says, like, he basically realizes, you are not ready for this role. I don't know what I was thinking. You have growing to do. And you kind of get the sense, too, when he brings Thor back, that he's not going to banish him. It's Thor's just outright disrespect in their conversation, where he just starts name calling his dad, and his dad's like, okay, you You really are this far gone. All right, buddy. At first, I thought maybe you were just misled, but no, you're just an arrogant fool who wants to go to war because you're good at fighting
Mm-hmm.
and you get accolades from it. And so he strips him of that one. He takes away the thing that Thor. It's like Thor's identity, pretty much. Thor's identity is wrapped up in this: I am a great warrior.
Yeah.
I cannot lose a fight.
Yeah.
And he takes that away from him. And basically, there's multiple lessons to be learned for Thor. Humility is one of them, but the other one is kind of, it's almost like a journey of self-discovery, if you will, where it's like his dad's kind of taking away that thing that Thor's wrapped his whole identity up into, and forcing him to kind of figure out who he is as a person, not just who he is as some warrior.
Yeah. And you see that especially in the interactions with um, the other characters in the universe in Earth. You see that with Dr. Jane Foster and her whole troop of people as they interact with him, and he tries to be at first like the god, come down to Earth and say, give me everything I want, and they go, what the heck, dude, you're just a random bro. And then from there, he starts to realize, okay, these are real people with real emotions, and I need to engage with them as such. And so, yeah, I could see that self-discovery. Definitely not my first impression, but it's also, I mean, I go back and forth, right? And maybe you could speak to this, because there is a sense in which, and maybe this is minor, maybe it's major. I'm still trying to figure it out in my mind. But there's this aspect in the film where they typecast um the dialogue of the people from Asgard to be very highbrow. And so you have this dialogue where they're saying things like very formally, if you will, right? And he's not going to say goodbye to the people of Earth. He's going to say each of their names and then say uh, adieu, or whatever he says, fare thee well, or that kind of thing. And that's the aspect where it's like, okay, I love that dialogue aspect where they're very highbrow because they are these gods who are coming down from Asgard. But there's also a sense in which this seems a little bit of a disconnect between him and the people of Earth. And maybe because of that, you see less emotion portrayed. I don't know. I felt like there was a certain degree that I thought the dialogue might have made him less relatable of a character, or made it harder to see his uh, progression as a character. But maybe you could rebuff that a little bit.
I think a couple of things. I think Thor as a character is meant to stick out. Like his character is very much like he is Asgardian, and the way that the MCU builds this up is like the reason Thor is the god of thunder is because people on Earth know of him, and they went, "Oh, he's this guy who comes down to Earth. He's obviously God." Um, and so, like, I think that there is, it's very intentional, the disconnect. Now then the question becomes, should the disconnect be there? And I would probably say yes to that, because I think the whole point is like Thor isn't used to humanity. In Thor's eyes, even though he looks human, humans are nothing. They're pitiful beings. Like I think at this point he's like 1,500 years old. And he has, like, that's why when he first comes down to Earth, he just ignores their very existence. Like he's just looking around. He doesn't give a crap. And he's at the hospital and he starts just going at it with these doctors and just tossing them around. And he's like, to him, he's like, do you guys not know who I am? What is wrong with you? And so I don't know. I think that I kind of like the disconnect there, because it's another element that Thor has to acclimate himself to in his conversations. And as the movies progress, you notice that Thor starts to pick up more like social cues when it comes to interacting with humans, and he also his vocabulary starts to shift as well.
Yeah, you see that especially when he's starting to talk to Jane Foster about the connection of the realms, and how this is what you guys call Earth and this is what we call Earth, and things like that. So yeah, you definitely see that. Yeah, I think I can be convinced. It's not a sticking point for me, but it definitely was a little bit of a disconnect, and that's intentional, clearly. So, what
Yeah.
were your thoughts on the conflict of this film? And some of the conflict wasn't exactly clear because Loki isn't revealed to be the villain for sure until later on when he's talking to the Frost Giants at Jotunheim. What were your thoughts on all of that?
This is where the movie lost some points for me because it isn't quite clear. And I think really there are two villains or enemies. Because, again, what is an enemy? We've talked about this. It's something that stands in the way of the protagonist. And in this movie, at least the first portion of it, that obstacle for Thor is himself. He is his own worst enemy, and he has to overcome that obstacle. And once he's overcome it, it's like inadvertently Odin has prepared him to overcome the next obstacle, which is his brother. Um, and I think going like we just reviewed the Lion King, I think it's very interesting because Thor is very much a Simba type character almost, and he goes through a different journey of transformation, but he very much starts out the same, where it is like he just sees being king as power. That's all he wants is this power and authority and the accolades that come with it. And it's like he has nowhere else to go in his own mind than up. And he's this great warrior. Might as well add king to the resume.
Right. And you're talking about
talking
about Simba at the beginning of the Lion King, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And you see this more in later movies, but it comes to a point where this movie is him recognizing that being king is not just about the power and authority that it comes with it, and that the people other than just as guardians, like all of the 9 realms, these are people too. Like they just as much as guardians have a right to be recognized and like appreciated and ruled over justly as a king. And Loki is similar to Scar in that he is the version of Thor that doesn't recognize that. And that's why when he confronts Thor, he goes, "Did you really turn that soft by just going down to Earth?" And it's like, yes and no. It's more that Thor just realizes what his dad has been trying to tell him this whole time.
I mean, you are getting an aspect with Loki where he is this trickster, right? And that's stereotypical what he is in the rest of the cinematic universe, right? And them leaning into that as his personality was very apt, right? It made sense, and his character was definitely cohesive. The problem wasn't necessarily him as a character. The bigger problem, it felt like, was it wasn't clear how he was the big conflict point. And you see that with later Thors, where he's not necessarily the primary villain, but he's more of the thorn in Thor's side, right? He's like he's an ally, but he's also not. It's like, well, what is he? And he's always playing these games, and that's part of the frustration that Thor experiences later on. So, spoiler alert. But but with him specifically in this film being more of the primary villain, it was a little bit of a loss, especially because you see moving up to the almost the climax, right? He welcomes the Frost Giants in, only to then shoot the one who's about to kill Odin, presumably to get curry some sort of favor with Odin, by showing, hey, I care for you and I'm protecting the realm or whatever. But it's very much a backstabbing his own people type situation. Yeah, so I mean, Loki's an interesting character, right? Because he messes with people. He's clearly got ulterior motives for things, but then he seems to, by, for example, aligning himself with the Frost Giants only to backstab the Frost Giants. You see that he's not necessarily an enemy of Thor. He's not necessarily an enemy of Odin, and it's not clear who he's really aligned against. He's just for himself, right? And it doesn't maybe provide as much of a clash or conflict as you see in other stories where they are directly opposed to the hero. And part of that is because he is a trickster. You don't know what he's going to do next. And then part of it is, too, is that he's Thor's brother. And he doesn't really seem to have an incentive to kill his own brother. He has some care for him. So, I don't know. I don't think he was the best villain, for sure. Especially in even in the Thor series, right? There's better villains. But he provides an interesting villain and could have been done better. That was kind of my takeaway.
I think Loki isn't meant to be the main antagonist in the Thor movies. Um, and so, like, in terms of an origin for Thor, it makes sense that they went with Loki. And so, like, I don't really have an issue with it. I think it's just different, I guess, is where I would go with that. Because really, this movie, the true villain that Thor has to overcome is himself, and once he overcomes that, he's able to win the rest of the battles throughout the movie. But you see him repeatedly failing when he keeps trying to just basically he just wants to punch his way through every situation, and he realizes that that's not the answer to his problems. And it's when he comes to terms with that that he's finally able to overcome the difficulties that he's presented with.
Yeah, and you see that. And that's an interesting perspective to take because, in regards to the climax of the film, that would put the climax at a very different point than other people might put the climax, which would be when he gets the hammer versus when other people might put it, let's just say, at the point where he has the showdown with Loki on the Rainbow Bridge. Um, what was your thoughts on the themes here and how that growth is portrayed for Thor in that moment where he's facing the destroyer? I forget what the machine's called.
Yeah, the Destroyer.
Yeah. So he has that big face off, and then he goes, "Let these people go, kill me instead, or take my life," or whatever he says, and then he gets backhanded by the machine, and then shebang, he's got the power of the gods once again, and comes off to face his enemies. Yeah, what was your thoughts on that arc?
I mean, I've always thought of the climax of the movie being that scene. Like, I've never thought of it as being his confrontation with Loki. Um, I think it's done well. I think it's the instance where Thor finally comes to terms, and he like tells his friends, "I'm gonna be useless in this fight. Like, I'm stronger than average, but that's not gonna help us here."
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I've got that
and
Aussie
like,
blood, but that's it.
um, he like he kind of resigns himself to his fate, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was thinking about it. I was like, if all it takes is basically committing suicide to get the power of the hammer, then I feel like most of the Avengers should be able to wield that by now. Um,
Definitely
um,
Iron Man, that's for sure.
yeah, true. Uh, but here we are. And so, I don't know. I like this scene. I think it's done well. I don't have too many, like, I don't really have any problem with it per se. They do a good job of like setting up the Destroyer as a formidable foe. And then once Thor gets the hammer, you realize, oh shoot, he really is powerful with this thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's definitely a fair comparison, and is putting the climax there makes more sense, especially because from then on out you don't see a lot of development. More of that has to do with Loki and his character and demonstrating who he is, honestly, more than it has to do with Thor, because Thor from there on out is basically, I know who I am, I know what I want, I know what I need to do, and this is what I need to do. Right. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know that I put it there personally, but I'd be willing to. I don't know that that changes my rating, though. And honestly, part of that is because even within that arc, one, as soon as he makes the statement, hey, take my life instead of theirs, and is willing to make that sacrifice, it's instant, basically, that he gets the hammer back. So it's not like you have a big gap between the willingness to sacrifice and the beneficial result of getting Mjolnir. So I don't know that it was surprising per se. And the other fact of the matter is that it was building up to this as his arc. If you were watching it all, you know that it was moving toward a sacrificial arc from a man who is arrogant to a man who is humble, who is willing to do what it takes to help the people around him. And so I don't know that the arc itself was super surprising. Is it fulfilling? Yeah, it's great. It's a great story and it's a great message to hear. And so then fulfilling that and him getting the hammer is not a problem. Um, but it didn't really like get a ton of points in regards to revealing anything for me in that regard. The only point it did get some points for the whole Loki is a bad guy revelation, but even that was so heavily hinted at that I went, okay, it's not a huge revelation because they they directly say it. The Warriors 3 and Sif have a discussion about it in the middle of the film about what if he was the one who let the frost giants in to begin with at the beginning of the film. So,
Yeah.
there are it got points. It had a good message, and I think the message was valuable. And it's much more important to fulfill that than to have a surprising ending. So, all that to say is, good job, good job,
I
Chris.
mean, I will say, I don't think his willingness to sacrifice is really that quick in terms of like the turnaround from his willingness to sacrifice to getting the hammer. Because like I guess the go to or what I'm getting from you is you're saying like as soon as he says okay I'll confront the destroyer, I kind of see his arc, that start of him giving up when Loki tells him like your dad's dead, you're banished forever. And like in Thor's mind, that's the moment where he's already kind of defeated. Like he's not going to get his hammer. He like doesn't know what to
Sure,
do with himself.
sure.
But when he realizes now he's resigned to this fate, he's kind of like, okay, I deserve what happened to me. I caused my dad to die. My brother's having to bring peace to the Nine Realms. Like I truly royally screwed up. Um, and that really goes a long way in humbling his character and being willing. And I think that his confrontation with the Destroyer is the termination of that mindset that has been building up inside of him. And I mean, the confrontation with the Destroyer isn't truly the only place he has to sacrifice either, because his destruction of the Rainbow Bridge is also him letting go of what he had built up on Earth. Like he had made friends and he had built connections there. Okay, he had a girlfriend too. So, well, I guess they're not really boyfriend and girlfriend. Whatever. It's weird. It's a superhero movie. He had a girl that was
Yeah.
there. But he doesn't really hesitate. Like
Mm-hmm.
as soon as he realizes that this thing can't be stopped, he's like, okay, then the only solution is to destroy this thing. Um,
Right.
and
You're
like
talking about it destroying Jotunheim, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like he doesn't have any connection to the frost giants, but he recognizes that they are a part of the nine realms and they deserve just as much justice and like
Mm-hmm.
representation from the king of Asgard, or in his instance, the future king of Asgard, as much as the next place. And
Mm-hmm.
so he like there's not really any hesitation there in terms of his decision making. And like you can see, like if you're watching while he's breaking it, he is very much not enjoying the fact that he has to do so.
Right.
Whereas
Yeah.
probably Thor at the beginning of the movie would have had no problem with what Loki was doing.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I'm not saying once again, I have no problem with his arc. I think his arc is great. My only quib was that it wasn't surprising. And
Oh
that's
yeah,
a
yeah,
hard like thing to fulfill because,
yeah,
that's it's better to fulfill the arc and do it satisfying in a satisfying way than to try to not fulfill the arc for the sake of having this surprise revelation that, oh my goodness, did you not see this coming? No, I did not, but also that shouldn't have been in the film, that kind of thing. We don't like that.
yeah.
And so, you know, push comes to shove, they did it good, and that's what we got. So, you know, could they have done better? I'm sure they could have. Even with if you go with Andrew's rating and give it a 7.1 or whatever he gave it, it still has room for growth, but that doesn't mean that they didn't have a good message to be conveyed in this, and they conveyed it well through the arc of Thor. Felt a little basic to me, probably a little more nuanced in the eyes of Andrew. That's fine. It's still a message worth being told. So, um, what are your thoughts on the other characters in this film before we get too far off the beaten path? We already talked about Loki a little bit. We talked about Thor. What are your thoughts on Odin as a character?
I mean, he serves his purpose. He's meant to be the dad who's passing on the baton, but realizes his son is not fit for this role.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas Mufasa died, and that forced Simba to grow into his role, Odin didn't die, and he realized that his son wasn't listening to the lessons he had tried to teach him, and so there was only one solution, um, and he has to banish him. And so it's not just as his father; it's as king of the nine realms. Like his actions have consequences, and he needs to also like. I'm assuming even if he didn't get banished, there was going to be some major consequences for what he had done,
Mm-hmm.
considering that they were pretty much about to go to war with the Frost Giants.
Right.
Um, and so I think Odin's good. He's not really meant to have flaws as a character. He's more meant there to kind of push Thor in the direction he's meant to go in this movie.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had any other thoughts on that.
No, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is the idea that he's definitely old and feeling some of the frailty of age. And that's what you see with the Frost Giants, even, where you see Laufey goes, "You are old, Allfather." And he realizes that his enemy, who had held him at bay in the past, might not be as strong as he was previously. And he sees some opportunity here as well. So I think it's setting the stage, right? An old king who is set to die is leaving potential vacancy for someone to take his place. And now this extends into later films, right? It doesn't terminate here, but it's a strong theme to add great conflict in general in films or in TV shows, honestly. I mean, you see this in Game of Thrones, you see this in the new Dune show, you see this in like a whole bunch of different storylines. Is this idea of, oh, a king's getting old, House of the Dragon, right? Like you have a vacancy that now needs to be filled, and the void that is potentially there, how it gets filled by people, right? So Odin falls into the Odin sleep or whatever it's called, and who's going to be king while he's in the Odin sleep, and who's going to rule the realms, right? Thor's not here, so who should it be? And I think it's a great way to add conflict, and using him in the way that they did was decent. I mean, it wasn't. I think I would agree with you that it wasn't the strongest use of Odin. I don't know. I think he was interesting as a character. He has one of my favorite scenes, but he could have been done better. And the fact that you kind of just see him as the father figure speaks to the fact that it was okay. So, that being said, when he banishes Thor is a powerful scene.
Yes. Whosoever holds this hammer, granted the power of Thor.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, as for the other side characters, this is another place where I didn't really give it too many points because, like, Thor's friends are pretty basic.
100%.
They're just like the Three Musketeers,
Right.
And Sif.
Right.
Or Sif and the Warriors 3, and it's just like, oh, we're here. And I'm not gonna lie, it is kind of disappointing because his friends throughout the entirety of the Thor franchise don't really change from that.
Right.
His three friends in the second movie are like, oh, we're here to help, and they're just kind of just like extra bodies to help him fight. And then in the third movie, Hela just instant kills them.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, they weren't really that powerful after all. And if they were, then she's just really powerful. But we don't know because we haven't really seen them fight before. And then Sif isn't even in the third movie. She shows up in the fourth movie, which is abysmal all on its own. And it's like, wow. Now she's like, it's almost like her character devolves throughout the movies, which is kind of disappointing. Because she goes from being this like character who clearly has a set progression, and then in the fourth one, another reason why that movie sucks is they just give her lines because they want her to say it, and it's like she loses an arm. Oh, I will have a warrior's death, and it's like, okay, that's retarded. I don't know what's going on here. Why is she even in this movie right now?
Right.
So I mean, as far as side characters go, not that great. Jane Foster's character, she's okay.
You don't like
I
Padme
didn't have
in this movie?
I think Thor should have ended up with Sif, but that's just me. Or is it? I don't know. But I think her character is interesting. She serves a purpose. But I think at the end of the day, she's the girl for the superhero movie.
Right. It's providing extra conflict in regards to Thor having a tether to Earth, right? And destroying the bridge has actual consequences for him, which is good, right? It having the sacrifice of the bridge mean something to him in a way that he's giving up something is important for the end of the film. Is she that
Hmm.
compelling, and is the romance that compelling in this film? I would not say so. It
Yeah.
seems very basic, and one of those other elements of this movie that felt very basic. So
Hmm.
it's fine. Yeah, I have no
I
disagreements with
think that
anything you've said on those characters,
I think that Pepper Potts is a much better female
for
like
sure,
side character.
for sure.
Like I think Iron Man. I like this movie, but I think Iron Man like knocks out of the park in terms of like the dynamics in play there, and like telling a story of someone who goes from being arrogant and self-absorbed to actually caring about others.
Yeah.
Um, as I think about it, I think probably the reason I gave this movie a higher rating than you. Granted, I still try to be objective with your rating system, which is I'm kind of curious why you went for like a 4.2 or something, or 4
A
point, or was it 4.9?
4.9. Yeah, and
Okay,
actually, so looking at it, I misselected one of my selections on it, so it's actually 5 points higher. So it is a 5.4. So
okay,
revision now, it is a 5.5 rating on
okay.
my scale compared to what I said earlier. My apologies. Go ahead.
Um, I think one of the reasons is you see this as basic. I see this as, well, yes, basic. I still see this as a fulfillment of an arc. It's like just because it's basic doesn't make it bad. Like In and Out's great food. It's
No,
still basic
no,
burgers, but it's great. All right, like
yeah,
it tastes good. I
yeah,
could eat In and Out all the time. I have never had a problem rewatching a Thor movie, and so while yes, it's not like the most fantastical and there's not a ton of nuance to it, it takes all of the elements that need to be there and it puts them into a superhero story. And it takes a character that is
uh-huh,
decently well known. Like Thor wasn't probably the most well known hero. Actually, I know he wasn't. Like Superman, Spider Man, Batman, and Wolverine, I think, are the top four of all time. And so he's not as well known.
hmm,
Not even as well known probably as Iron Man and Captain America. But they took this character,
right.
they made a movie, they made a good movie out of it, and they had a very fulfilling arc for the character of Thor. Albeit there were some problems with there. It was pretty basic, but even though it's basic, I prefer that to what's coming out now, 100%.
100%. Yeah. Please,
And so
we're
I
not
think
in
I put,
disagreement there.
well, I think I just put more value on, even if it's not as nuanced, on it being a fulfilling arc, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Whereas I
Yeah,
think
and I could
you're
see.
almost looking more for like a I don't know what's a really really fancy burger place. You're looking like for the full entree here, and I'm like, I like the basics, okay?
Sure, I see what you're saying, right? And I think that, for example, especially having a fulfilling basic arc, some of the aspects of the rating system are supposed to reflect that, right? In regards to, does the character change as a person? Is there a message that's conveyed? What are the themes here, right? Is there a compelling motive for the protagonist? Is there do they have compelling flaws? Basic things like that that really build into a great story. You have to have that to some degree, are supposed to be represented in that. I think it. So, for example, where it lost points from me are areas like heightening the tension, and that's important because when you look at Thor, you're looking at a character who he loses a lot, but he loses a lot of it early on, and so you have this aspect of you know. His coronation is destroyed, and then he goes to beat the bad guys only to come back and then get banished, right? And then, but then once he comes to Earth, other than the hammer, where he realizes he's truly lost his power, it's kind of just a little bit of a meandering, if you will, around Earth, and he's trying to like, okay, I'm not really scared of anyone here because I can fight them all. I'm pretty much just trying to figure out what the heck is going on and where my hammer is so I can go home. And then once he has a hammer thing, that is pretty much the only significant aspect until the destroyer comes along and you have the climax that affects anything that he does there. Everything that is significant, if you will, is for the side characters' purposes, right? Dr. Jane Foster, Shield, all of that stuff is important for them. It's not important for Thor. So, I mean, in regards to expanding the MCU, it was significant. In regards to revealing Hawkeye, it was significant. But like in regards to our primary characters' growth and the tension they were building there, not so much. and it took a pretty significant ding from me there on that aspect of the review. And then in regards to like revelations and things like that. So there were several aspects of the film where it got significant dings from me. And then other areas where it was like solid but not full points. So like, 80% instead of 100% on that rating scale. So between those things, that's where it got the rating that it did, which is a 5.5, which is a solid rating, right? Enjoyable, would watch again, not a top pick for me.
I'd probably push back on the heightening tensions. Like, I'm not going to argue with some of the basicness that the movie has,
Sure.
but I think that they do still do a good job of heightening the tensions for Thor because, or at least putting from a bad situation to a worse one in his own mind. Because he starts out, right, assuming this is his coronation, he starts out from almost becoming king of Asgard to then having it ended, being banished, then after being banished, he tries to get his hammer, can't get it. After not being able to get his hammer and realizing he's truly banished, now his dad's dead and he's banished forever, and his mom never wants to see him again. He's never going to see his brother again. So it's a very fast jump. It's a rapid progression for him from going, okay, I just need to find my hammer, to okay, now I'm stuck here forever. And then after realizing that, he kind of resigns himself to his fate. Then he goes and confronts the destroyer, and to him, he has no idea that he's getting the hammer. And to us as the audience, like, yeah, it's predictable, but at the same time, like, he's not supposed to know that. And then, I mean, if you want to rise the tensions and the stakes even more, then he cuts off all of this life he had started to build up on Earth by destroying the Rainbow Bridge, and then he loses his brother, who, even though they had issues, he still cares about him. And so I didn't give it full points for raising the stakes for Thor, but I think I would still give it a decent amount for it consistently is raising the stakes for Thor as a character and kind of pushing him to his limit.
I mean, yeah, like I said, I made my case for it. I would say that a lot of what you said was reflected in how I reviewed it. I also personally just have a problem with movies that undo sacrifices almost immediately after they happen. So, was it fulfilling, for example, for him to get his hammer after he says, "Take my life instead of theirs"? Yes, it was. But does it also undo the sacrifice immediately by giving him the hammer? Yes, it does. So, or for example, saying Loki falling into the abyss is a pretty good sacrifice, right? But then, in the end credits scene, revealing him to be still alive immediately undoes the very end of the film and the sacrifice that happened there, right? It would be much better, in my opinion, if you simply let him appear to be dead until the next film and then reveal him to be alive again. So, it's like, I don't think it's a compelling way to tell a story to undo what you say is a sacrifice. And so that's what it comes to when it comes to heightening the tension. But, obviously we have some disagreement here. You, as the people watching, if you disagree, leave us a comment down below. All right, we're enough of that. And if you do want to review the movie yourself, figure out what your rating would have been, how it would have been different from ours, you can always check that out on our website. It is alostplot.com. And then there's the 9-point system at the top bar, or you can just do alostplot.com/9 points, or 9-points. And that'll get you there. So that's the movie. Do you think that this movie had a lasting impact, Andrew? Looking at it in the broad spectrum, they made 3 movies after that. You think it was worth its time?
Yeah, I mean, when they're making this, Marvel is still kind of in the testing phase to see how successful their cinematic universe is going to be. They haven't made the Avengers movie yet. I think at this point they'd made Iron Man and Captain America, right? I don't know the exact dates for the order these movies came out, but I believe Thor comes out afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, so if you looked at this film, they do say that he will return in the Avengers. So it's very clear that they were planning at this point to at least come out with another film. That being said, you are right that they have, if you look at these early movies, a lot of them are very neatly packaged, right? They are a complete story by themselves. You don't need a next movie after that to have that arc be done. So you're still in that phase. You're 100% right. But keep going.
I'm looking up the dates here for the Marvel movies, and it's not giving me the. Okay, we've got Iron Man, we've got Thor. Yeah. Thor comes after the Iron Man movie. I'm looking for Captain America right now. Okay, no, I don't want the Brave New World movie. Yeah, so it comes out. That one came out July 19th. Oh, Thor came out in the same year as Captain America, but slightly before it. Anyways, they're clearly planning at this point, after releasing Iron Man 3 years before, to now make an Avengers movie. But this is still the testing phase for them. Like, they don't know if they're going to go past the Avengers movie per se. I mean, I'm sure at this point they wanted to, but is it going to be
Correct.
successful is the real question. And clearly it was. Like, Thor is a beloved character in the Marvel universe now. I mean, he's still around, unfortunately, at this point. But, or actually, I don't know if it's unfortunate. It's
Right.
just unfortunate that the movie they made was so garbage. So, yeah, I think this
And if
movie
you want to
has a
see
good
that
lasting
review,
impact.
you could check out Thor: Love and Thunder.
What was my thought? Oh, I think it had a lasting impact. It's a great introduction to superhero movies, specifically to the MCU.
That's a fair way to take it. I think that's pretty much all we got for this episode. So that's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We'll be back, as we always are, next week. We'll see you all then.